critical mass, so let's get things started. Thank you everyone for joining another community call. As some of you have probably seen, we've been publishing weekly updates on the Bancor blog, and our most recent community update went out last Friday. On this call, we want to give a high-level summary of the recovery efforts underway to restore LP reserves on the network and bring the protocol back to full health. Now, in the past 2 weeks, there's been a huge spike in DAO participation. We're seeing a lot of new voices, more ideas, and lengthy public discussions on key proposals happening in our discourse, and it's happening from various members of the community. So the ideas are flowing, and it's encouraging to see that these challenging times are galvanizing members of the Bancor community and beyond to participate in this decentralized brainstorming to solve the current issues and restore LP funds on the network. So broadly speaking, there have been about 4 key areas of focus in the current recovery efforts, and I want to quickly go over those. The first is fee allocation. So where are we sending the existing fees that the network currently generates? And as the protocol grows its fees, where will these fees go? The second is fee burning. Now, how are we burning fees? For what, at what rate, and should those rates adapt according to different tokens or specific metrics in the protocol? Third is a big one and a top priority, of course, is fee generation. Now, how do we grow fees and evolve Bancor's model? And so this really consists of 2 main parts. The first is a focus on trading fees. Now, how do we optimize the protocol to ensure that we're generating the maximum amount of fees specifically from trading? And now second, and we've long discussed how Bancor 3 is a multifaceted yield generating protocol. And so we're in the process as a community investigating how the protocol can earn fees outside of just trading. And how can the protocol use these strategies to accelerate our recovery efforts and set the protocol up for success in the future. And the fourth and last key area of focus is protocol analytics. So how do we generate and expose the data to make better decisions as a DAO? And how do we track the success of implemented features? Now, we have the first version of a community analytics dashboard in the final stages of data verification. And today we're going to quickly go over that dashboard as well. So we'll get into that later. Now, overall, I just want to say that I'm encouraged that the ideas are really flowing in, as well as the feedback. As they say, necessity is the mother of invention, and our current challenges are attracting a lot of big brains to participate in this recovery. So, and I think our ability as a community to leverage this collective brain power will only increase as these proposed solutions and our analytics stack matures. So thank you guys for being here and hearing me out. To start, I want to invite Jen and Mark on, who are going to dive into these focus areas a little bit more, and then we'll get into some sneak peeks on the community dashboard and analytics. So if Jen is around, looks like you have your hands up, so I'll allow you to speak, and then Mark as well. Can you guys speak up?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
I can. Go ahead.
Mark, you're good too. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Nate. Mark, the first key focus area that Nate mentioned was the fee allocation. And I think by fee allocation, it's, you know, the yield throttling model, the DAI model, the protection model, the ones that we had, you know, previously brought up on discourse. And you had posted a technical document on Thursday, kind of comparing these 3 models. And I'm hoping that you wouldn't mind going into a little bit more depth on each one of them for us.
Sure. I mean, you know, I wouldn't really call it a technical document. I'd call it more of a tutorial. And so I created that not necessarily to lend support to anything or, you know, to criticize anything, but to provide sort of a foothold for conversations in the community. So, you know, created a bunch of graphics and sort of, we tried very hard to make sure that the language was consistent. And yeah, it's essentially just trying to be something like a quick reference material so that people can, refer to it in order to make their arguments. So it's not comparing any of the solutions against each other with the view to describe why one is better than the other necessarily. It's just there so that people can understand how the behaviors between those three different ideas is, so that they can contrast them and come to their own conclusions about whether or not one is stronger than the other. I also have provided it so that people can add different ideas. I don't think that we should assume that these three things that have been discussed are the be-all and end-all of anything that we can propose. I think that the framework there, with regards to repurposing the vortex and how those fees can be used and things, is an open-ended, infinitely variable system. And so if someone has a brighter idea for how these things can operate, then by all means, I want them to suggest it and discuss it. And I think that the types of diagrams and things that I've provided there, I'd be happy to, provide the source images so that people can create their own diagrams from them using the same format. But it's absolutely not a proposal, and it's not trying to compare them with regards to their relative strengths. It's only trying to make clear what the differences are between those three different ideas.
And something else, I see a lot of discussion around them and the percentages that are posted there. And just to kind of clarify to everybody on the call, those are just more or less like not even suggestions, I would say, but those are parameters that were set for more of a—
Those are examples.
Yeah. Right. And those would be adjusted by the DAO. I see, some discussion. Go ahead.
So yeah, if any one of those three, and like I said, I don't think that these are the only three that should be discussed, but if any one of those three is gaining significant traction, for example, I think the third option, the yield throttling one, is something that I think a lot of community members have voiced their support of, and that's great. Once we've established which one of these concepts is one that the community is happy with, then any of those parameters inside it are up for debate. So, for example, I think that yield throttling one is suggesting to throttle the yield by 90%, and that's fine. That can be done. But if we think that that's too aggressive, then we can use a smaller number, like 80% or 60% or whatever it happens to be. So, yeah, like I said, it's not a proposal. It's just a heuristic description of what a proposal might look like.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you for clarifying. There were a couple of other fee allocation mechanisms that are being explored. And one of them was to adjust the on-curve, off-curve liquidity based on fee levels. I'm hoping you can explain that a little bit. And for anybody who's not on, who's on the call and not familiar with what it means on curve and off curve, if you can explain that to us as well.
Yeah, certainly. I think that there's a number of different ways to look at it. So V3 was built with the idea of having off-curve liquidity. So let's just imagine that V3 is a brand new protocol and it's accepting tokens for the first time. Let's imagine that it accepts like $1 million in a new token. Let's just call it token A or TKN. With that $1 million of liquidity, one of the things that you might do is keep $500,000 of it off curve. And this was going to be used for other features that were going to be built on top of V3. And then the other $500,000 you can combine with the BNT pair and make liquid markets with it. Now, the advantage of having half of those tokens off of curve is that no matter what happens to the price of stuff, you know that 50% of the liquidity that was added can never be traded out. And that means that the deficit level, for example, is always going to be limited to 50%. And this is, this is in the, the bit 15 documentation. This precise mechanism is described. And so I think where people are, starting to get, get motivated is that with the current deficit discussion that's happening within the channels, is that people want to take some of the liquidity that we already have and move it off curve. The problem with that is that if the pools are going to become re-equilibrated over time, and I think that we should expect that this is going to happen, that anything that you take off of curve will never get replenished. So for example, if we take something like, again, let's just say a TKN pool that's already at 50% deficit and everything is on curve. When you split that into 50% on curve and 50% off curve, if the pool re-equilibrates, the stuff on curve might return back to, back to surplus, for example, but the stuff off of curve never will. And so that will mean that, what would have been a return of the entire vault balance back to surplus might mean that you only return back to a smaller deficit. So something to consider. It's not, it's not necessarily the magic bullet that I think that a lot of community members are wishing for, especially once a token is in deficit. The analogy that I've been using with some people recently is that you build the ark before it rains, not while it's flooding. So for things like YFI, for example, where we still have quite a healthy surplus because BNT has continuously outperformed that token even during the deep capitulation that we've had. We've got a surplus of YFI, and so it actually might make sense to take some of the YFI off of curve because we have a surplus of it, and that will mean that later, if if that project does something really exciting or whatever, that we can actually limit the deficit on YFI to within whatever parameters we choose to set. And so this is akin to the sort of stuff that people were asking me about 2 weeks ago, when they, when there was a lot of discussion about limiting the deficit to a preset threshold. You do that when you've got a token that's in, that has a very small deficit, or a token that doesn't have any deficit at all. And so something like YFI right now is a really good candidate for that because it's in surplus. But for things that are already in a heavy deficit, in my view, doesn't really make sense. Because you're really cementing in the deficit that you have by taking it off of curve now. And in a sense, that's why it makes sense to do it with tokens that are in surplus, because you can cement in the surplus before it gets any worse. Put money in the bank, so to speak.
Okay, perfect. I just have a question. How would you, it says adjust the on-off curve. I'm kind of looking at our blog update here, and it says based on fee levels. How would it actually be based on fee levels, or is that kind of still being explored? I know that this is one of the main things being explored at the moment. So I don't want to jump ahead. Yeah,
we've had a community member, or actually a group of community members, I was actually informed. But the proposal was put up by the David Meister, who is a Solidity developer and a long-term, he's I consider a friend of mine, and certainly a long-term community member and contributor to the Bancor DAO. And what he's proposing is, or what that proposal says in it, and what the group of people that I think went into brainstorming that idea are proposing, is that you can use the fee levels to determine the effective liquidity. And it's an interesting idea. What I said in that governance forum post is that I'm not lending support to it, or nor am I critical of it, because it's so radically new. And I think that what we need to do is back test it, given some rudimentary assumptions, and see how it would have performed, in various market climates. But it's interesting at the very least, and I think it warrants further discussion. And I think this is probably one of the this is as good a time as any to raise the point that because of the increasing community engagement that we're getting, especially from people that actually are extremely well equipped to have some of these discussions, both programmatically and mathematically, that I'm looking forward to in the next couple of days opening up a dedicated Discord channel to sort of bring some of these people together, and then starting to run classes with our simulator, so that and give this software out to people that want to use it, so that they can start to generate the requisite data to support some of their views. And so if that describes you, if this is something that you would like to be involved in, I will be releasing the details of that imminently, and I look forward to seeing you all there. But yeah, this type of proposal is exactly the sort of thing that that we need this kind of sophisticated tool set to interrogate. And so yeah, that fee-based liquidity. We have so little information at the moment to determine as to to determine the merit that argument holds. But with the tools that we've developed to test those kinds of things, we should be able to arrive at an answer sooner rather than later. So the short of it is that there is a proposal to let the available liquidity be a function of the fees, and or maybe vice versa, and that I don't know how good an idea that is until we start running some high level simulations on it. Now, because of the relatively high level of difference that represents between the standard V3 architecture and what this new model is proposing, we are going to have to fork the simulator and make some code changes there. But the infrastructure is there for us to do that. So I'm looking forward to experimenting with it and seeing what the community can generate.
Awesome, thank you. I think we're actually going to bring Mike up on the call a little bit later to kind of explain the simulator a bit more. But before we do, there's another fee allocation mechanism that's being explored that kind of blends into the second key area of fee burning, and that's adjusting the percentage of fees per pool used to restore the TKN specific reserve versus buying BNT and burning for VBNT. I'm curious if you have any take on that, or if you can explain that a little bit.
So that sounds like taking fees and then using that to buy tokens in deficit. Am I understanding that correctly?
To restore the reserve versus buying BNT and burning for VBNT.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things I should point out there. So one is that you already get the tokens. So when we collect a fee from from a trade, that's already the token that you want to keep in a sense, because it's the thing that's in deficit, right? We take fees from the target token. So for example, if there's a huge number of trades into, I don't know, TKN, then you'll be collecting TKN fees, but it also means that the TKN deficit is going up, right? And this isn't unique to Bancor. This is all AMMs that collect fees from the target asset operate this way. I think the only AMM that I know of that takes fees from the source is Balancer. So that fee that's taken from the target, it's like, what do you want to do with it? Because maybe you get lucky and there's a super volatile pool or something that doesn't have much deficit and has a lot of fees. Then sure, you could probably take some of those fees and exchange them for something else. But the question is, where are you going to exchange them? We could use our own AMM, but because it doesn't change the number of tokens that we have, it actually isn't addressing the problem at all. So what you would need to do is to enlist the help of an external market maker or use a smart contract system that knows how to trade on other AMMs in order to achieve that. It's certainly something that's worth considering, but everyone should be aware that it's not, you don't get it for free. It has an overhead cost, which would be, the price impact and slippage associated with those trades, or if we're using an external market maker, the spread that they're taking, and so on and so forth. And so, it might sound really nice, but there are other, inefficiencies built into it that I think need to be examined carefully before we commit to that idea.
Okay, thank you. While we're on the topic of the fee burning, I know 90% of the fees on Bancor 3 are now being used. Well, we don't have the Vortex live on V3 yet, correct? But they are being held,
That's correct.
and they're going to be used to buy back BNT.
Well, they've already been used to buy BNT. So even though the Vortex, is, I mean, the Vortex is effectively live on V3. It just isn't trading BNT for anything yet. So the way that V3 works is that rather than collect tokens in an external wallet, and this is, again, it's explained in that tutorial. So in version 2.1, we collect tokens in whatever token that they are denominated in, and then we trade them in bulk on their own token pool for BNT. And this has the effect of increasing the TKN side of the pool and decreasing the BNT side of the pool. And then, the question is, what do you do with that BNT? You can burn it directly, but we invented a type of debt system that is benefited by the protocol then trading that BNT for VBNT and burning that instead. And so this is the paradigm that version 2.1 was operating on. In version 3, rather than collecting all of those TKNs, we actually swapped them for BNT in place. So this means that the effective burner wallet, rather than collecting 140 different tokens, it now just collects BNT, and that BNT was already purchased from all of those TKNs as they were being accumulated. What we don't have active on version 3 yet is the actual burner component, and this is another source of discussion within the community. Because when we finally turn that on, there's going to be something like 250,000 BNTs there ready to be traded out for VBNT. Now, the efficiency of burning VBNT is beyond question, but only when the VBNT price is below its arbitrage value. And depending on the relative liquidity that we have in the pool, it might make sense to burn up to some predefined threshold, such that the VBNT price is at its arbitrage level, and then just burn the other BNT directly, or hold that BNT in reserve and wait for the price of VBNT to come back down. But in general, the efficiency of the VBNT burner is at its highest when the VBNT price is at its lowest. And so right now, the price of VBNT has been slowly climbing up. And so if we buy a very large amount of it in a single transaction very quickly, that's technically a less efficient use of the Vortex than had we been slowly purchasing it on the way up. So it's a divisive issue, and there are nuances with it that have arisen because we haven't been burning anything since the start of V3. But it doesn't really matter, in my opinion. We've already traded those TKNs back for BNT, and now if we burn the BNT where it currently is, it still services its use, in my opinion. But I still think that at least a portion of that should be traded for VBNT and burned that way, because we actually do end up with an accelerated. It is more efficient that way in terms of economic cleanup, but only up until the VBNT price is equal to its withdrawal value. So something to keep in mind.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned arbitrage, which kind of brings us into the next key focus, one of them, and that was fee generation. And protocol arbitrage was mentioned as one of the things being researched and analyzed to expand the fees on the protocol. Maybe I could name a couple of them. I know we're not going into depth on all of them really, but there are two that kind of stood out that are really being looked at a little bit more closely than the others at the moment. And that's liquidity optimizations and integrations with off-chain market makers. specifically AirSwap at the moment. Maybe you can speak to those a little bit.
Sure. So the protocol level arbitrage is an idea that I've been working on for a long time. And I think it's because of the state of the project, it makes sense to sort of spend a little bit more research resources developing this idea out. But these things kind of come as a package deal in a sense, because I'm also looking at things like dynamic fees and modified bonding curves and other things to try and to force the protocol in the direction that we want it to go. But the idea with protocol level arbitrage is that sort of just reflecting on 2 years of data in DeFi, it become abundantly clear that the winning strategies have been discovered by people using protocols rather than protocols themselves. And so, AMMs like ours, like Uniswap, like SushiSwap, they provide a huge amount of value, but that value isn't captured by the protocol, right? It becomes, it bequeathed, if you like, to people that are using it. And in particular, very sophisticated actors that are using them. So things like, a minor extractable value has been a huge booming industry. And I think it makes sense to start designing protocols that defend their value better by employing the same strategies that that the miners do. And this is something that we can do, I think, relatively easily, right? Because if we have, if the protocol controls the way that external actors interact with it and can change the rules for itself interacting with its own pools, then you can give the protocol an edge. And I think that, when I was having a look at the way that arbitrage is performed, especially things like triangular arbitrage, which is something that the Bancor protocol is especially well set up to do. I was surprised to find out that there's actually, if you've got 3 different tokens in that triangle, then the direction that you choose to arbitrage it has different price impacts on those 3 tokens. And so you can actually bias the way that you arbitrage stuff in the direction that you want the market to move. And this is, this is what has been playing out in the industry over the last 18 months or so. And so because most arbitrage bots prefer to arbitrage to and from stablecoins or to and from ETH, then it kind of makes sense that things like ETH, are gaining on the rest of the market. But if we set up our own arbitrage system that chooses to arbitrage to and from BNT, then then that becomes the bias, if you like. That becomes the thing that's that can actually start to drift or trend in one direction versus the other tokens on the network. And this is immensely beneficial with regards to returning the protocol back to surplus. So it's not necessarily a fee, like, we refer to it as a fee earning, feature, but it's actually more profound than that, right? It really is about improving the structure, if you like, the underlying value, the robustness of the protocol, and also improving the tokenomics of BNT. With the other things, things like AirSwap, this basically just means that we can start to open up the app to trade tokens that we don't have liquidity pools for. And AirSwap, as an integration, it still provides value back to the protocol for us supporting, supporting their market making activities with our users. And so for every swap that's performed that uses, AirSwap as the market maker, right, as the maker, a small fee can still accumulate back to the protocol for that. So essentially, it's a perfect deal for protocols like ours, because we don't take on any of the IL risk or any of the inventory risk. We essentially just kind of take a very, very small slice of the market making profits that that the external market maker is making for themselves, essentially as a finder's fee, if you like. And this also means that we can open up trades from Bancor's pools into other tokens that we don't necessarily want to whitelist. And there's probably a very large collection of those. We've just recently tried to improve the community understanding of some of the security problems surrounding tokens with things like administrative privileges and other things. Whereas teams like AirSwap don't necessarily have to worry about those types of attack vectors. So if there's a really attractive token like Ape, for example, which is however you feel about the project, the token it does drive some volume there, and so we can actually share in that volume, or at least the fees that it creates, by offering trades into the Ape coin via AirSwap without having to include it in our liquidity pool. So it's kind of a win for everyone in the system.
Awesome, thank you. I don't know how familiar I was with off-chain market makers before learning about these types of integrations, and I appreciate the explanation. What about liquidity optimization? Is that, I think that's one of the main things that are being looked at the moment, correct?
Yeah, so this comes back to sort of how this discussion began. So liquidity optimization is certainly something that I'm very interested in, but we don't know how to optimize it yet. And that's not just that I don't know how to optimize it, or Bancor doesn't know how to optimize it. It's something that no one knows how to optimize. It's something that when Mike joins the call in a minute, he might be able to tell you some of the things that he and I have been discussing. We do want to run sort of some machine learning algorithms on these things to try and give us some insight into how to predict for optimal liquidity. But the problem is always the fact that we don't have a crystal ball, and so it's possible to grow a pool bigger when we should be making it smaller or keeping it the same size. And also the reverse is true. We might, shrink a pool down and move tokens off curve when we should be doing the opposite. But again, the thing that I want people to be thinking about is essentially that when you want a big pool, when you want lots and lots of liquidity, is when you expect that the two tokens in the pair, so BNT and whatever the other side is, are likely to range trade versus each other over long periods of time. So for example, you'll remember in 2020, Bitcoin was basically, bumping its head up against that $10,000 psychological barrier for something like 9 months. And that's the ideal time to have a very, very deep pool, right? It's something that's generating a lot of volatility, but hardly any IL. But when something starts to run, right, when something's trending against the rest of the market, this is when your risk is higher, and that's when you want a smaller pool. And these things are very, very difficult to predict. And you can have a look at some of the optimizers that are running for Uniswap v3, for example, and that is precisely what they are trying to predict. They look at where the price of something is likely to be, and they try to add liquidity there and then remove it before the price moves. And most of them have been hopelessly unsuccessful in that pursuit. But I think that that's also partially the fact that on Uniswap v3, when you're using concentrated liquidity, it's very, very difficult to respond fast enough, right? In general, the market's going to front run you. And that's generally what we see there. But if you're using normal constant product stuff, you've got the benefit of time to react. So the stakes are a little bit lower, and so I think that in general we can be a little bit more optimistic about how those optimizations might work. But yeah, without a crystal ball, you'll never be 100% accurate. And until then, I still think having the TVL on the protocol right now is not massively high. And so I think that in general, we should probably be looking to keep the pools as liquid as they can possibly be. and do everything that we can to benefit off the fees that it generates. So yeah, that's at the moment I would say that liquidity optimization is a fairly simple calculus. It's that if you've got deficit, then you want the tokens on curve. You want to be making markets with it, and if you've got surplus, it makes sense to take off some of those tokens and limit the deficit from growing. So yeah, it's a complex issue, and maybe I should be a little bit more involved in those discussions on discourse and things, but it's not nearly as simple as I think many of our commentators have made it out to be.
I understand. And we'll get Mike on the call. Actually, Mike, are you available? And Tiago, I'm hoping that you guys can jump on the call if you're available. The fourth key focus area was protocol analytics. And I was hoping you guys could speak on the dashboard that's been built out. Are you guys available, Tiago and Mike?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yep.
Can you guys tell us a little bit about the dashboard? I know we had mentioned it a couple times in the past, and we had mentioned it in the blog update. Maybe you guys can give us an update and tell us a little bit more about it.
Yeah. I can start. So an analytics dashboard has been highly requested by the community for some time now, and we have an MVP that will be made available during this call. Nick, Mike, and I have been involved in making it possible. Nick is also in the call, but Mike and I will be speaking about it. The dashboard has been built using Tableau. We've collected data from on-chain events and the Bancor v2.1 and 3 API, as well as other external APIs. It will be a work in progress as we integrate more and more metrics and visualizations, and the web page as it looks right now will also change and become more dynamic. So this is the goal that we have. I just want to highlight as well some of the advantages of using Tableau just versus Dune, because that's what we've been using so far. The main ones are that it's fully customizable, so it's just, I think it's a better way and smoother of visualizing data, and it allows us to quickly build on top of it. So this means that, we'll eventually have a fully interactable dashboard on pair with the current DeFi analytics dashboard standards, and even better. As I said, it's much smoother than Dune, meaning that we can now support a phone. So there will be a desktop Tableau, there's a desktop tablet, and phone versions. It's also easier to select symbols. You don't have to just deselect each one individually. You can select one at a time via a drop-down. And the dashboard can remove and add graphs based on your decision what metrics you want to see. So this also makes it less cluttered. With the ones familiar with our previous Dune dashboard for v2.1, sometimes the page takes some time to load and it might not even load at all. There's also no need to run queries. We will be running them for the users. You can check the most updated block in the dashboard, make sure that the data is up to date. If you find that it is not, just let us know and we'll update it. But we'll be doing this periodically, so it should be fine. The data can also be downloaded in a CSV format directly from the app, so you can work on it on your desktop and just see what you want to analyze. As far as info goes, we will be adding for now trading liquidity, volume, average size per trade, fees, average fees per trade, trade count, price, surplus deficit, and surplus deficit in percentage. So these are all metrics over time. There will also be pool-specific and protocol info tables that will give you some more information, either overall information or just the latest. And we also have a feedback form and a dashboard roadmap that is public, so that you can see what we're doing. I'll just drop the form in the chat now if anyone wants to eventually provide some feedback. The page will be available at analytics.bancor.network. It's currently password protected, as we're still making sure that all the data is correct. But Mike will drop the password here for anyone on the call to have early access. And with that said, I'll just let Mike expand on what I've said and talk about future features.
Yep, great. Thanks, Tiago. So as mentioned, we've got a, let's call it an MVP that's been tested, and we're just kind of finishing up the final test with. We've got a roadmap ahead. Some things that we've identified, we've got about 22 items on the list for things that we want to add. That's not including more stylistic things such as, you know, a dark theme and like time zone support and those sort of things. But just like raw data needs and wants. So things like adding VBNT burnt over time, you know, some of the governance stuff. We've got master vault balance and stake balance as metrics currently, but we want to go ahead and add like historical tracking to that over time, adding in like 24-hour versus 7-day APY over time, as well as even things like simulations, right? So we have a very robust and detailed simulator, which Mark had mentioned before on the call, and over time we'd like to add in there not only pulling raw data from the live protocol, but also potentially adding some ways for that users can run simulations and adjust parameters in those simulations to display on the dashboard as well. So it, like Tiago mentioned, we have a link both from the dashboard itself, which will take you out to a page where you can put in new requests for new features. And I believe if you don't already have access, we can make it available so you can see like what the running list of ideas is, so that people are not necessarily submitting the same idea over and over again, but we can kind of take a pulse on what the most demanded to-do items are. And I guess at this point, probably a good idea. I can go ahead and I'm not sure if I know how to do this, but yeah, I'm going to add the password into the analytics site now. And then you can go to analytics.bancor .network and view the existing dashboard page. As soon as we're done running our tests, which we expect in all likelihood will be today within the next couple hours, we will make some posts and put those on blogs and in other media to kind of make a more formal announcement. But for anybody on the call who's really interested, wants to get on there and look at like the alpha MVP, so to speak, you're welcome to do so now. I'm going to drop it in the chat as soon as I can focus on how to do that here. But yeah, I think that's it. And Jen, I guess I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, no, awesome. Thank you guys so much. You are, just to clarify, are you lifting the password or are you going to reveal the password?
I'm going to reveal it right now. Yeah, I'm going to reveal it right now, and then we will lift it entirely a little bit later.
When it's ready to be made public.
Exactly.
Okay, perfect. And are you going to be putting it in the Telegram, or is that something that you're going? Oh, there it is. Okay. So Bancor 3 no space is the password for anybody who's looking to get a sneak peek at the new dashboard. Thank you guys. I appreciate you jumping up on the call. Mike, stick around because I want to pass it over to Glenn right now to discuss the current proposals and governance, but I want to bring you back up and discuss the simulator with Mark in just a minute. So stick around for us. Thanks. Glenn, are you on the call? Would you mind going over the current proposals and governance for us?
Yeah, sure. How is my mic good?
Yep, you're perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. So I'll go over the stuff that passed. The first one was essentially the V3 Vortex. It's now up to 90%. So this was at 30%. The DAO voted to essentially move this up to 90% on version 3 of the protocol. On V2.1, it's set at 100%. So that means that 90% of collected fees in version 3 are now being used essentially to acquire BNT, because the version 3 Vortex is not yet implemented. The last leg, which is essentially swapping BNT for VBNT and then burning that, has not occurred yet, but that collection is still occurring. So yeah, so that's there. The other one proposal that passed, we had a few tokens in version 2.1. which we had liquidity for, but they were never approved by the DAO to actually be onboarded onto version 3. What this meant is that if you were an LP in this token, you couldn't essentially withdraw because the pool didn't exist in version 3 for you to migrate over to. So now the DAO essentially passed to create the pools for these tokens, but they have a 0 funding limit, meaning that they have no trading liquidity. So there's literally no risk by having these tokens there. The other proposal that passed was essentially, this was from the Ichi community. This was just a reduction in the funding limit on their pool, and that was approved as well. There is a proposal right now in Snapshot for voting. This one is essentially looking to have the DAO be the I guess the have the DAO be the thing that triggers the vortex, right? So what this is looking to do is, typically the initiator is an outside party, and the person that initiates the vortex, right, they typically get a fee for doing that activity. So it's either 100 BNT or 2% of the fees, whichever one is like the lowest amount. Now, what this proposal is looking to do is like, okay, how about we restrict this only to the Bancor DAO to trigger the vortex, and any like of those fees that are being collected, they could potentially be put into like a Bancor treasury, which there is another proposal for Bancor treasury that is being discussed. Essentially, this is looking to set up a framework for such a treasury, like where's the funds gonna go, right? What are they gonna be kept in? Is it ETH, DAI, BNT, right? Like if someone is looking to request funds from this treasury, like what is the process for doing that? Like what are the parameters for like the governance side of things, right? In terms of like supermajority, quorum requirements. So that's another sort of proposal that's looking into like this treasury, just having some sort of a framework for setting that up essentially. So that is on Snapshot right now, not the treasury proposal, but the one that's looking to have the DAO be the initiator for the vortex. The other two proposals that are sort of being discussed right now, this one was David's proposal, which Mark sort of talked about in detail. He's trying to find like an optimal pool size and essentially like a Goldilocks zone, as he described it, to figure out like if there's like a point where fees can start to like reduce deficit, and what is like that Goldilocks zone for the optimal pool size. And out of that proposal, there is another proposal that sort of was put up in governance. I think this one was from Anima. This is looking at the link pool and essentially taking some of the ideas from David's proposal, applying this to the link pool and trying to see if there is like an optimal pool size for that pool. So both of those are getting a lot of, I would say, a lot of updates or comments from the community. They're both well thought out, and people should read them just because they're, there's been a lot of effort put into those. There's other proposals that are under discussion. Obviously, we have the potential direction for recovery. There was a poll that was put in place there as well. Essentially, we had the three options, right? The DAI model, the protection model, and the yield throttling model. And there was another option essentially to focus on like fee generating features and then revisit in like 4 weeks. It looks like the yield throttling model and the fee generation feature option are like sort of like the ones that are, I would say, like neck to neck, or they've been pretty close essentially in what the community sort of like has a preference for. So that's that. We have proposals that are talking about burning BNT versus VBNT. This is like an ongoing discussion. Mark sort of mentioned that there is like an optimal, at some point there's like an optimal, I would say an optimal way that we can switch over to burning BNT when like the rate is no longer favorable for us to burn VBNT anymore. So those discussions are happening across these different proposals. There's a proposal for migrating the V2.1 surplus to V3. Also under discussion, there's some pools in version 2.1 that have surpluses, right? How should that surplus be handled? That's being discussed by the community as well. We talked about the Bancor treasury already. There's some proposals around, I would say, just regular community stuff, things like using Discord more. There is a proposal from Mark, which goes into more details on the different recovery options, right? So Pretty much these are all on the table right now. I'm going to also talk about some integrations that are occurring on our end. As many know, we already have 1-inch integration. We have Matcha integration because we have 0x API essentially support, and a lot of different wallets, they use 0x API to figure out like which protocol gives you the best outcome for a trade. So both version 2.1 and version 3 have been integrated. Paraswap has been something that has not yet been integrated or done. So that's something that is being worked upon on the back end right now. There's also some integrations with crypto fees. This is just a website that shows you like the fees that are being generated by a protocol. We had version 2.1 in there, version 3 data. We're looking to get that there as well. So those are like the 2 integrations. And I think there is some talks about the simulator. Maybe this is for Mark and Mike. If you guys want to sort of discuss some information there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Glenn. We really appreciate you going through all of those. Mike, you're still on the call. Mark, you want to jump back on? I want you guys to speak more about this simulator and a little bit of what you mentioned earlier as far as becoming a little bit more developer focused.
Yeah, sure. So I don't want to give it like too much time because it would run the risk of becoming way too technical for this call. But essentially, when we're doing when we're exploring different design aspects of AMMs, it really doesn't make sense to not have some sort of test platform, something that you can check your assumptions on, or that you can determine the likely behavior of before you end up committing to it. And so everything that's done in those kind of early development periods has always relied on sort of a makeshift simulator just to be able to demonstrate how that idea is likely to manifest. And when Mike was contracted, he and I were working very closely together on, taking some of the early simulators that I had developed for V3, and then making it into something that's a little bit more general, and something that's a lot more robust, a lot cleaner, and something that is, going to be able to be used by anyone that has a Python environment on their PC. And so Mike and I have been working on this together for a long time. The Yeoman's work was completed by Mike and Barak recently, and it's got a lot of really interesting features, things that are industry firsts. So, for example, you've got the ability to run between like floating point arithmetic and fixed point arithmetic, which is what Ethereum is contingent on. And you can measure the difference between, an equation that is executed, to infinite precision versus the precision that's limited by the Ethereum virtual machine. Things like that, right? So it's really every aspect of something that you might want to test, not just whether or not your ideas are good, but whether or not they're even compatible with, with the Ethereum virtual machine. And so this has been developed into something that if you've got an internet connection, you can download that entire software package and start operating with it. And Mike, maybe you can tell us just a little bit about the documentation that you've prepared and how close we are to being able to distribute it.
Yeah, sure. So like Mark mentioned, we've got a fairly substantial amount of documentation, or at least an attempt to put most of the features in the documentation. One thing that would be not included at this point would be the fixed point versus floating point toggle that Mark just mentioned, but all of the let's call it the functionality that is outlined in the BIP 15 proposal. So kind of like the 70-page document that describes in detail the V3 protocol and tokenomics. All of the major, all of the functionality that's described therein is also accessible to the simulator. And so the documentation basically takes the BIP 15 proposal and runs through it kind of start to finish. And so all of the major sections in there are covered with examples in the simulator. So wherever Mark has called out like an example equation or used an Alice and Bob example in the document, we basically take that and provide the corresponding way to perform that calculation using the simulator, so that you can change around values, you can see how it works, and ultimately build and edit the examples to do things that you want them to do in a very customizable way. For those who are even more advanced users, we will be opening up the GitHub repo, and like Mark mentioned early on in the call, for new governance proposals that are being discussed, and maybe there are some technical users out there who want to pull down the whole repo and make fork it, make more fundamental changes to the code base to introduce new features and test new features and that sort of thing. Ultimately, you should be able to do all of that. And so, yeah, we're actually really close to being able to get this out. And my goal at this point is to release the code base documentation for the simulator today, by the end of the day. And so yeah, it should be the analytics webpage dashboard. As soon as we're done testing that, then I've got a couple more things to do to get the simulator released, but we should be able to put those into like a blog or something like that as well, and make it the documentation website, which is another subdomain that's currently password protected. And so we'll be taking the passwords off both of those and making a public announcement about how to visit and use both of them.
And then, yeah, and just prior to this call, I confirmed with Mike that we would have some time over the next couple of weeks to set up something like a class for people that are looking to engage with the project, either as a developer or as an academic, or even just as a community member that's looking to sort of get their legs under them in protocol design and AMM performance and things like that. And so this is again, coming full circle, why I want to create sort of a dedicated Discord group. And so anyone that wants to be a part of that and get sort of their feet wet in the simulations and discuss AMM math or whatever it is that you want to do, Mike and I will be spending a little bit of time getting that up and running, and then hopefully get it to a stage where it's self-sustaining. But I do think that it would be nice to have sort of a more dedicated developer focused community call for people that are looking to contribute to the future of Bancor in a much more sort of technical way. But I'm really looking forward to that, and I hope that you guys are as well.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. So when that is ready to be released, Mike, we'll go ahead and make an announcement and let everybody know. Maybe at that point, versus just a blog, we might be able to organize some sort of a walkthrough or an explainer, something where it can be like more of an interactive thing as well.
Yeah,
Discord or something.
That, I think that's Mark was alluding to that. We've had in the pipeline or the to-do list to come up with, both like some live classes in some format, but also video tutorials and that sort of thing as well. So yeah, but 100%, we will be doing all of the above soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think that just about sums up the call. Again, if you haven't seen Mark's explainer, I don't want to call it a technical doc, but if you haven't seen that on Discourse with the diagrams and everything, it was definitely helpful to me. There's also a video up there, a YouTube that Zeno had posted, kind of breaking down those 3 options a little bit more as well. If you're looking for more of an understanding of those, I definitely recommend taking a look at them. The analytics dashboard, if you missed it, the site and the password were in our main Telegram. So if you want to check that out, get the sneak peek before it goes public, please do. And then we'll keep you guys all updated on the simulator as well. Any questions and things, please post them on Discourse. We're not getting into the Q&A today, but definitely encourage, like, the amount of participation that we've seen from the community and being a part of the community really has been encouraging. I know that it's been mentioned before, but I want to mention it again. Please take your questions to Discourse. Give everybody else the opportunity, to kind of participate in that and build the thread. And the developers, everybody is super involved on Discourse, and it really has led to a lot of interesting conversation and points being made and things that some of us might not otherwise be thinking of ourselves. So thank you all so much for joining the call. Thank you, Mark and Mike and Glenn and Tiago and Nate, for jumping on here with me. And again, any questions, please go to Discourse, or all of our DMs are open as well.
Thanks, June.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys. Take care.